So, a history of the web. So, the web was, the internet started in the late 60s, and it was a project created by ARPA, the Advanced Research Project Agency, which today is known as DARPA. And DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, creates things to protect our country and also to, to kick ass in war, to be offensive. And so that's DARPA. And in the late 60s, they needed a way to ensure communication would continue in the event of a nuclear war. And back then, we had circuit switch networks. And so we'll just look here to see circuit switching. And circuit switching, right, doesn't have a picture. Let's just see what pictures look like. See if there's any. No. Old phone circuit operator board. Beep, beep. Like back in the day, right, it would actually be somebody who would like create a physical connection between one location and another. And that was like a circuit. Well, if your physical line of communication goes from Los Angeles to DC through Denver and Denver gets blown up, you're no longer talking, right? And so what they came up, because the wire has been destroyed, what they came up with was packet switching. And so packet switching network will break your communication up into packets. Just looking to see if I'm just seeing if it has any good images. I don't see any. But it breaks it up into packets, and it puts an address on the packet, and then it throws it onto the network. And on the network, routers then find the best route to get the packet to its destination. And then when the packets arrive at their destination, they get reassembled into the original message. And so in that situation, there's a whole network across the country. And I'm in LA, and I say this message, these packets of information need to get to DC. I throw them onto the network. The routers can figure out which routes are open and available and the quickest. And then they send the packets over whatever routes are working to the destination. And they arrive in DC and they get reassembled. So if Denver gets blown up, no big deal. We just go through, Arizona, Phoenix, or we go through Seattle and then Chicago and then DC, right? And so communication can continue. That was the internet, is the late 60s. And I think 1967, the first message on the internet was LO. They were trying to type login, but after LO, it stopped working. And so then that was like in the 60s, 70s, and in the 80s, they started to open it up to academics. And then in the early 90s, right, like Tim Berners-Lee, this guy Tim Berners-Lee got tired of text messages arriving over the internet, and there was no formatting. It's just text. And he said, we could mark this text up. And so we could have things like a paragraph, we could have a heading. And so if my message was like this stuff here, and let me start this. And we'll see all this in a second. So if this was like my message that was arriving, it's like he was like, hey, we can mark this up. And we could also send text, which, we just say this is supposed to be a heading. And so we'll open up and we'll say, here's the heading, right? And this is where the heading ends. And so there is the markup language. And so now this text still gets sent over. And if you just open it as text, that's what it looks like. But if you open this in a special piece of software called a browser, you open this in a browser will take those markup tags, right, the H1s, opening H1, and then this slash here means it's a closing H1. A browser will interpret that and say, oh, these are for marking up the text, telling me this is heading level 1, and it will format that as heading level 1. So a browser looks at the text that came over, formats it, and then makes it look pretty. And so Tim Berners-Lee created that, a markup language, and then a piece of software called a browser to look at the markup language and to structure the text that's coming over. So it's a little bit more readable. So you're not just getting a big thing of text like this, right? You actually, when you run it through the software program, the browser, it formats it. And so that's the hypertext markup language, right? That's the hypertext markup language. Okay, so we're marking up text with hypertext. It's a markup language, marking it up. Does that make sense? Yeah? Cool. And let's see if there's anything else we wanted to say about that. So we had when it started, so that was like 92 or 93. Who started it? Tim Berners-Lee. And why they started it, format text. We've learned about the internet versus the World Wide Web. We've seen what HTML, how hypertext markup language marks things up, and we'll learn more about CSS and JavaScript, because CSS is the formatting, JavaScript's the functionality. And then in the next video, we'll take a look at how the web works, and then we'll create some pages.